Solving equations by adding and subtracting. We want to be sure and use inverse, which is opposite operations. So for instance, if we're adding, the inverse is subtracting, and if we're subtracting, the inverse is adding. As we solve word problems, there are key words that help us to know if it's an addition or subtraction equation. Let's look at a couple of those. If you see the term how much more, that's probably going to indicate a addition equation. Alright, for example, let's say Layla jumped 2 3/4 feet. 3/5 feet. And there she goes. Her goal is to jump 3.5 feet. So how much further does Layla need to jump to reach her goal? Well, the how much further is the same thing as how much more. Here it's talking about distance. But basically, this is saying Layla jumped this far. She needs to be able to jump this far. So how much further, it's this space right here, how much further does she need to jump? That's our x. So we're going to represent our x, or our variable. X is the extra distance needed to reach her goal. I'll just say extra distance needed. But Layla's already jumped 2 3/5. And we know the whole thing all the way across is 3 1/2. So she's working up to it. She's practicing, hopefully getting a little further each time until she can reach her goal. Alright, so we have 2 3/5. We're adding x to it, and that gives us the total 3 1/2. So it's easier if you diagram this out. If you're having trouble visualizing that, just draw a picture, like I have done. And I would say 2 3/5 plus x equals the total amount, which is 3 1/2. Right, now that I have my equation, I'm going to use inverse operations. So I'm adding the 2 3/5 to x, so I'm going to subtract it to get rid of it. And I'll create a little room here. So minus 2 3/5, cancel, and then minus 2 3/5. These need to have the same denominator. So the 2 and 3, the least common, I'm sorry, that's a 2 and a 5. The least common denominator is going to be 10. So I need to multiply that by 5 and that by 5. And 1 times 5 gives me 5. And then I need to double the 5 to make it 10. And double the 3 to make it 6. Now I can't take 6/10 from 5/10. So I'm going to need to borrow. So if I take away 1 from the 3, now that's at 2. I'm going to give it back in the form of a fraction. So plus 10/10. And when I add 10/10 there, I get 15/10. Because 5/10 plus 15/10 gives me 15/10. So now looking at the 15 and the 6, 15 minus 6 gives me 9/10. And then the 2 minus the 2 is nothing, so it's just 9/10 for x. And that answers our question. So 9/10 of a foot. You got it, Layla. Keep practicing. All right, now another type of word problem is if we see the words indicating that we're using up material. And using up material could indicate a subtraction problem. All right, let's say a restaurant used 11 3/8 pounds of ham during lunch. 4 3/4 pounds of ham remained after lunch. How many pounds of ham did the restaurant have before lunch? So here they used up material. In this case, they used up food. So the restaurant used 11 3/8 pounds. So here we started out with a lot of ham. And that ham could be represented by X. And then we got rid of some ham. We used up. So we subtracted the 11 3/8. And that's probably going to be a little bigger. There we go. And then we had a resulting amount of 4 3/4 after lunch. So that is a subtraction problem. Anytime you see used up, if you're using it up, it's going away, so we're subtracting it. And then we know how much remains is 4 3/4. We just don't know how much we started with. So here, X is going to stand for the initial weight of the ham. Making me hungry, all this ham here. And now to solve this, we would just, the inverse of subtraction is addition. So 11 3/8 we're going to add, and add 11 3/8. These are going to cancel because that's 0. And we're left with x equals something. Let's find out what that something is. The 3/4 and the 3/8, they need a common denominator of 8. So I'm going to double the 2 and double the 3, and I'm going to get a 6 on top. And now 6 plus 3 gives me 9/8. I know that 9/8 is 1 1/8. So I'm going to add that 1 1/8 back to my 4 plus 11 is 15. So it's 15 plus 1 1/8, which is 16 1/8 pounds. So that's how much we started with. 16 1/8 pounds. We ate up 11 3/8 pounds. I say we like it's just you and me, but obviously a lot of people played into that. And then 4 3/4 were left. All right, next up we're going to check out how to solve whenever we have negative fractions and make sure that we still remember our rules that we had for integers. So when you have negative fractions, the first thing we're going to do is use inverse operations. And after we've done that step, we're going to estimate. And estimation is your friend. It helps you to find mistakes before you submit your answers. It's like you're your own quality control person. So always estimate. And then third step is to solve. And then our last step is see if it makes sense. So compare it to the estimate. So let's say we were asked to solve and check and the question is x plus 5 5/6 equals 2 1/9. I'm going to chart these off. So my first step is to use inverse operations. I'm adding the 5 5/6, so I'm going to subtract 5 5/6. Whatever I do to one side, I do to the other side. So first step, check. I'll make a note that was my first step. Second step is to estimate. So check out what we have there. These canceled, and now we have 2 1/9 minus 5 5/6. If I just round these to the nearest integer, really on that second step, think of it as 2 minus 6. And the 1/9 is closer to 0 or closer to 2. That rounds down. 5/6 is greater than a half, so it rounds up to 6. So that would be 2 minus 6. Now think about my rules. When I subtract integers, I really just take the larger number, which is the 6, subtract the smaller number, which is the 2. 6 minus 2 is 4. But I need to remember to keep the sign of the larger number. So the larger number is 6 and it's negative, so that would be negative 4. So my estimate is negative 4. Alright, well now my third step I'm just going to solve. So I'm going to do 5 5/6 minus 2 1/9. Notice I took the bigger number, put it on top. I'm subtracting the smaller number from it. That's absolute value, of course. You just ignore the negative when you think bigger and smaller. Okay, so 6 and 9, 18 is going to be my common denominator. And if I double the 1/9, that becomes 2/18. If I triple the 5 and the 6, I get 15/18. And now I can take 2 from 15, so I would just get 13/18. And I can take 2 from 5, that would be 3 and 13/18. And remember, the bigger number, the larger number was negative, so my sign is going to be negative. So I get x equals negative 3 and 13/18. And now my last step, I'm just going to check and make sure this makes sense. So for my fourth step, negative 4 is pretty close to negative 3 and 13/18. Pretty close, because negative 3 and 13/18 is the 13's more than half, because it's greater than 9. So it's closer to negative 4 than it is to negative 3. So these are pretty close, so it checks. Alright, that wraps it up.